Hey all, how's it going here? Another month, another reunion raid video, and this time around I'm gonna format it a little bit differently because a lot of this is going to be assumptions and like just predetermined team comps. But I wanted to make sure that info is out immediately because I know there are some people that kind of finish Reunion raid a lot earlier, and I want to make sure that this video is available for you guys immediately so you guys can use it. So let's get right into it. I'm going to talk about the 3 different teams that we have available, and I'm going to talk about the different substitute that they would have. So first things first is the Tanaga team comp. That would be kind of like our team A, and it's very interchangeable. You guys know it. The burst one is going to be interchangeable between volume, Doherty, or litter. So those things are pretty straightforward. Depending on the boss is where you would start allocating the units. So for example, if you are against Gravedigger or Stormbringer, then that's when I would start putting in Red Hood and Maxwell. If you are using Snow White, then I would start swapping in Red Hood, so it would be Snow White and Maxwell. And if I have to use Snow White, I would say she is better on the Stormbringer or rebuild Vulcan R. I kind of just don't like the moving around of Gravedigger. You know, what if you just end up whiffing? It might just end up being annoying. I mean, you can entertain that, but just for your sanity's sake, I personally would go with the Rebuild Vulcan or Stormbringer if you do plan to use Snow White. However, if you do plan to use Red Hood, then Gravedigger is a lot more open. Now, if you end up using Naga with the Armstrong or Porter, then you can start swapping in with Ludmilla in here. So you can put in Ludmilla and Maxwell, and you would go with Armstrong and Porter. So that's kind of how you would put in your team 1. And now let's start talking in with team 2. And team 2 is where I would put in the bunny girls. And so Alice and Modernia are there, right? So I would typically put it in rebuild Vulcan R, and the reason for that is because Gravedigger and Stormbringer, that's where you would put in your Red Hood. But then for Alice, there's no elemental advantage on any of them, and so rebuild Vulcan R is one of the easier bosses to do it. And not to mention, whenever rebuild Vulcan R puts his shield up, Alice's burst is pretty good at dealing with that. And again, for burst 1, personally I would not use Doherty in this one, but you can switch between litter or volume in alongside with bunny girls. Now here's the thing, if you end up going to hit with the bunny girls in the Armstrong or Porter, then you can actually swap in either Alice or Modernia, and you can put in Ludmilla in there. So that's kind of how I would do it. You can also put in Maxwell if that's another team that you would want. Now obviously you have to be careful when putting in Maxwell in here because you need to make sure that Ludmilla has higher attack than your Noir, or otherwise like your buff would end up being on Maxwell and Noir and not Ludmilla. So you just gotta make sure on that one, and you gotta make sure that you're bursting in proper order. So Armstrong and Porter. So that's something to just be wary of when using Maxwell in the bunnies team. Now here's the thing, if you might end up just using the bunnies in the Gravedigger, and so in that situation, so for example, one thing that I would say is like if you ended up using Snow White in here, which is one thing that some people might end up doing, and you know you end up using it on Rebuild Vulcan or Stormbringer, then you can actually put in Red Hood in here. And there's something that I have heard about the current Gravedigger, and that you might end up needing healing on that one, or the cover is not going to be ideal, and so there might be a situation where the Tanaga is actually not good on Gravedigger, and so you might end up using the bunnies instead alongside on dealing with Gravedigger. Either that, or you could use litter to make sure that your cover is recovered when using Tia. So that's something you just gotta make sure to do when you're doing the Tanaga against Gravedigger. I don't know how threatening is the shield destruction when you're dealing with Gravedigger in that situation, but in that in any case, so you can do that, and you can put in red hood in here. Now the team 3, then I would start going with, this is our team 3 that I have set up. It would be Dorothy, Ludmilla, Summer Anise, and Privity. Now you pretty much kind of see where this team is going to go. Yeah, this is like a water team, right? So it would go with the Armstrong or Porter. But again, if you end up like using your Ludmilla or Dorothy in this Tanaga to deal with Armstrong and Porter, then this is the team that you would end up using Naga with Dorothy and Ludmilla and Maxwell against the Armstrong and Porter. So there are some people that would be able to be strong enough to actually deal and one-shot them. So in that situation, and they would end up needing the Naga, then this is something that is worth considering. Now, as you can see, Scarlet is benched, but there is substitutes. So for example, if you did end up like using Ludmilla in your Naga team, then you can replace Ludmilla and put in Scarlet in here. And now you might be wondering like, oh no, what about the healing, right? Then you can actually start swapping in, putting in remove Privity and put in Helm, for example. So you can get a healing with Scarlet. So this is Dorothy, Novels, Helm, Summer Anise, and Scarlet. This does kind of need Summer Anise with level 9 burst, so you just gotta make sure so that she gets that one bullet thing. But yeah, so that's the team that I would use. So this team is what you would end up using if you don't need like a healer. But if you do end up needing a healer, then I would just pretty much like replace this and put in Helm, replace Privity and put in Helm in here, and that way you have Ludmilla in there as well with Summer Anise. And you can replace Summer Anise with like Scarlet, for example, in this situation, or any other DPS that you kind of just have left over. So that's the main teams that I would start using. Now let's start with the substitutes. So for example, you don't have Dorothy or like Volume or Litter, like one of them you don't have, then you start going to need like a separate team instead. So in this situation, then you can start using and entertaining. So for example, Summer Mary, you could start using her, put in Pepper instead of Summer Mary, and then remove, you don't need that, and then you can start putting in Privity, and you still have your Summer Anise. So you have this kind of team, or replace Novel with Dala or Summer Helm. So that way you have a cooldown reduction in this kind of team. Now here's another thing that I would like to mention. So in case like you end up having to deal with Gravedigger or Stormbringer, some people kind of forget that Summer Helm is a very good DPS against these kind of bosses. So because she is an iron and she increases the damage against electric bosses, so it doesn't matter if they're water or not. The whole thing is it increases the damage taken by electric code enemies. So if you end up like using, Red Hood somewhere else too, that's another thing. Or if you end up just having to use your team 3 in your Gravedigger and Stormbringer, I think you should definitely heavily consider Summer Helm. And that's easily overlooked by a lot of people, especially for people that have like damage over time, like for example Ludmilla, which takes advantage of having more damage over time. Now there's another thing, if you end up replacing Modernia from your bunnies, or you don't have bunnies, then you can start considering putting Modernia alongside with Summer Helm, because Summer Helm is debuffing the electric enemies. And since Modernia is, even though she's fire, and she's gonna benefit from this, and it's more about damage over time for Summer Helm. So you could actually ended up using these kind of team comp with Summer Helm, and then you can replace it with other unit. And now here's another thing. So let's talk about like team 4, team 5 for people that don't have those kind of like expensive units. You can start swapping in. So for example, shotgun team is pretty good against Gravedigger. That's something to remember. Well, ideally you would want to use Summer Helm because Summer Helm is really good against Gravedigger. So if you don't have Summer Helm, then you can use Dala, and you'll have like a shotgun team of Pepper, Sugar, Drake, and Guilty. So that one is good against Gravedigger. So that's just a good old classic shotgun team. And if you end up like not needing a healer, for example, then you can just end up using Tove instead because of a shotgun team. So Tove, Summer Helm with Sugar, Drake, and Guilty. But I think this might end up needing a healer. If it does end up needing a healer, then you can start considering either replacing Guilty or Drake or Sugar. So if you're replacing Drake, you need a healer, then it'll be something like Helm, so she can heal. Or if not healing, then with Helm, then you can replace Guilty instead with a sub healer, something like Rapunzel or Summer Mary. I am not 100% sure yet in the Gravedigger if we do end up needing a healer or you end up like a recovery, but that is something to just be wary of if in case like you are too low level and you do end up needing a healing. So that's with Gravedigger on the shotgun team. And then another use for the shotgun team is for it with Pepper and also with Dala and Guilty, and these are wind characters. Pepper and Guilty are wind characters, and they are good against rebuild Vulcan R. So that's something to consider as well. So those are the two places where you could end up using the shotgun team. Now let's start talking about the solo carry Snow White team. So in this situation, you could actually, I left a blank here with Miranda, Dala, and then Snow White and Yulha, because this team can be used in pretty much like all of these bosses, but some probably more preferred than the other. I would say there's two places where I would prefer using this boss. It would be on Rebuild Vulcan R or Stormbringer. And because in Rebuild Vulcan R, you can actually end up using Snow White, and she can time it alongside with Yulha, and by the time the shield comes out, this timer will actually time with Yulha's buff, and you can also destroy the shield immediately. So that's a Snow White tech that you can start using. And in that team, you can actually end up using this kind of team with Polly or Novel and Yulha, Snow White. So these team would end up being used, and you don't end up needing a healer. If you do end up somehow needing a healer, then you can replace it and put in Helm for that. But I think that if you manage to properly play with Snow White, then you might not end up needing a healer, and you can do something like this guided team. Now, if you do end up not needing it on Rebuild Vulcan, then you can also replace Dala with Summer Helm, and then go with Stormbringer, and you can use this team with Yulha. Or if you do end up needing a healer, you can actually use Polly and Summer Helm, and then also normal Helm. So you can do something like this where Polly will buff Snow White, or you can replace Polly with Novel instead. That's very interchangeable. Polly and Novel are pretty interchangeable in terms of like just general use, and you just have to make sure that if you end up using Novel, just make sure that Snow White release it ASAP and you're fast casting your burst, so that Snow White will have enough time with Novel's debuff while it's still active. And finally, if you just don't have anything else, then you can start using and entertaining the team comp where you're using Biscuit and Summer Anise, and then another burst too. It could be Novel, could be Polly, it could be Masked, whichever one you like, and you can end up doing the double support team comp with Dorothy, Biscuit, Masked, Summer Anise, and Brevity. There's one thing that I would say that might be bad on this team. I'm not sure if you have enough strong burst to destroy the shield on Rebuild Vulcan R. So that's something to just be wary of if you end up like using this team. And you can also just replace Summer Anise if you don't have Summer Anise. There's Winter Ludmilla, so if you need like the water team. However, this time around with this kind of team, you probably be better off just replacing Biscuit. She's only really buffing Dorothy, so it's whatever you need. But the Biscuit, something to pay attention to, is a healer sort of. So if you do end up like needing a healer with the Dorothy Privati team, that's something to consider as well. But yeah, this format is a little bit different. It's more about talking about the different teams and which bosses you can end up doing. Water team, so you would end up using Ludmilla against Armstrong or Porter, and it could be either with the Tanaga team, or you could put her. Honestly, Ludmilla can be put in Tanaga, Bunnies, or the third team, whatever you have left over. And with Gravedigger, ideally I would use the Red Hood there, so either Red Hood on the Tanaga team or the Bunnies girl team. And I think I'm not sure how confident we are on the maintaining the shield or cover against Gravedigger, so I'm more erring towards the Bunny girl team in Red Hood against Gravedigger. And then the rebuild Vulcan, that's where the Bunnies girls teams is where I would put him, and I would like to use the Alice in here or Snow White, and just something that will immediately destroy those shields. And those units are good with like really strong bursts. Red Hood is another consideration, but not much on the damage over time units like Modernia, for example. So that's just something to pay attention to if you guys end up doing the rebuild Vulcan. I think there's a lot of people that are just not prepared against rebuild Vulcan whenever it comes out, so just pay attention to that. And then for Stormbringer, I would go with Pierce units, so Snow White, Maxwell, Red Hood, which are pretty much like the main iron DPS anyways, and those are really good against Stormbringer. Then you can use Tanaga and Bunny Girls on the Stormbringer. Those things should be fine. One thing that you just need to pay attention to when using Tanaga on Stormbringer is Tia's taunt. You might end up needing to kind of hold her attack once a while, or you might need to make sure that she is facing forward while the lasers are coming in, so that she can tank that and not get her shield destroyed. So that's just something to be wary of if you end up using Tanaga on Stormbringer. But yeah, other than that, good luck guys, and I'll be streaming this once I finish my Union raid. I still have my second and third account, which I still have to do after my main account is done, so that's gonna about it. But yeah, anyways, good luck to everybody, and I'll see you guys next time.